Sir, the crippled one just shot our general in the eye, from 3 kilometers away. That was the first sentence that shattered the Zyvan admirals' laughter aboard the orbital fleet. One of their own had dropped to the Martian sand without warning, helmet caved inward, eyes wide with confusion in his final frozen expression. The sniper round had entered so cleanly it took a full second before anyone realized he was dead. And the source? A transmission bounced off a fractured Earth satellite. A low voice, scarred and steady. You counted Earth out. That was your first mistake. The sniper's name was Dorian Vale. Earth knew him as Whisper. Zyvan Command had tagged him as residual biomass, immobilized, low threat. After their orbital scans showed a man in a wheelchair with one arm gone at the elbow and a visible spine brace. Their mistake wasn't assuming he was harmless. Their mistake was assuming he was alone. The outpost he inhabited had been stripped, half destroyed, and long abandoned by retreating Earth forces. It wasn't a military base anymore. It was a graveyard. But Dorian remained buried in the bones of the last stand, listening, waiting, and breathing through cracked filters in a climate suit patched with duct tape and old war medals. He didn't need legs. He didn't need both arms. He just needed the Zyvan to keep underestimating him. He made peace with death the day they left him behind. That wasn't abandonment. It was by choice. They offered extraction when the final wave fell. Dorian refused. He said, "I've still got work to do." So they left him, saluting as they lifted off, unsure if they'd ever see him again. Most of them didn't. When the Zyvan Admiralty reviewed the planet's surface in their war rooms, they joked about the Martian silence. No biohives. No signatures. Just one-wheeled cripple roasting in the sand. Admiral Vrex had roared with laughter, spilling synth wine down his armor. What's he going to do, roll at us? The next morning, Vrex's laughter ended when General Caxer dropped during a routine ground scan. No alarms, no incoming alerts, just a pulse of wind, a click from his helmet, then silence. The impact zone was nearly undetectable, buried deep in the fractured terrain. The Admiral's staff argued it was a mechanical fault. Vrex demanded a field sweep. But Dorian didn't fire again that day. He let the fear settle in. Let the doubt crawl under their skin. Inside the half-buried bunker he called home, Dorian calmly adjusted a cracked scope resting on a steel mount bolted to the floor. His rifle was a custom Earth remnant model, an ugly thing pieced together from surviving parts of 3 different sniper platforms. The scope clicked gently as he tracked a patrol ship skimming the sand ridge, unaware it was already locked into his arc. He didn't fire. Not yet. He was listening. Always listening. Sensors routed into a tactile board under his single good hand buzzed softly. Footsteps. 50 meters out. 6 legs. Zyvan. Troop armor. Light reconnaissance. He didn't move. He waited. The Zyvan patrol spread out cautiously. They still didn't know where the shot had come from, and now they were walking into a grave with a ghost inside. Dorian triggered a false thermal burst 50 meters north. The nearest alien turned, confused. That was enough. A breath. A twitch. The crack of air pressure and sand splitting as a second shot echoed across the wind. The Zyvan's head snapped sideways, a fine mist painting his partner's chest. The second trooper dropped instinctively behind a rock, screaming into his comms. "He's here! The sniper's real! Sector 13! We're under attack!" Dorian exhaled and let the weight of the silence return. Orbital Command had no response plan. They hadn't thought Earth had any operatives left, let alone one good enough to make a kill from that distance without detection. They scrambled for satellite visuals, but Dorian had long since covered the outpost with thermal blankets and magnetized debris to distort readings. All that showed from orbit was a mess of wreckage and heat echoes. No sniper. No source. Admiral Jask furiously tapped through kill records. Who the hell is he? Talrun, the quietest of the 3 admirals, narrowed his eyes and pulled up an old Earth dossier. Vale. Dorian. Human sniper. Special reconnaissance, Mars campaign. 40 confirmed kills. Decorated. Discharge due to injury. Last seen on Mars. Status presumed dead. He paused. Guess we were wrong. Vrex waved a hand dismissively. Send in the hunt squad. I want him on his knees before sunset. Back on the ground, Dorian had already anticipated the move. He'd scattered audio lures across the valley, old Earth music loops stitched into malfunctioning Zyvon helmets, each one broadcasting on random pulses. As the hunt team dropped in, they found echoes of strange static and distorted guitar riffs buried in the sand. It wasn't war. It was art. Psychological warfare made personal. One by one, they fell into his range. One by one, the count ticked up. Dorian never moved more than a few feet. He didn't need to. The ground moved for him. When the sun dipped beneath the jagged rock formations on the horizon, casting blood-orange shadows across the outpost, Dorian leaned back in his chair, breathing shallowly. Pain lanced through his back. He could barely feel his left foot, and the arm brace around his ribs was cracking from overuse. But he was still alive. Still watching. Still calculating. And in orbit, the Zyvon command board flickered once more. A line of data scrolled across the fleet's primary display. Kill count 7. Sniper designation, Whisper. Status, active. Vrex stared at it. He's naming himself now? Talrun didn't look away from the screen. No. That's not him bragging. That's a warning. Dorian Vale, the disabled sniper of a dead planet, had just declared war. And he wasn't done yet. The desert around the Martian outpost had never been silent. It whispered constantly, between the thermal winds, shifting sand, and the fractured remains of a war long over. But now, the whispers carried something else. Something alive. The Zyvon hunt squad moved cautiously, 6 soldiers in obsidian armor, each one bristling with energy scanners and pulse rifles. Their confidence hadn't been shattered yet, but it was cracking. Each of them had reviewed the footage. Each of them had watched a sniper round punch through reinforced Zyvon plating like it was paper. What they didn't know was that Dorian Vale had watched the footage too, from a hacked helmet cam left behind by one of their dead. He saw how they moved. Heard how they whispered orders, what formations they favored, how they checked corners. They were trained, but too formal. Too rigid. They expected predictable resistance. But he had never been predictable. His traps weren't made from clean logic and uniformity. They were messy, improvised, designed to exploit the exact habits that made aliens like the Zyvon feel superior. As they approached the perimeter, Dorian flicked a switch on a crude interface board wired into a food tray. An old pressure sensor buried in the sand let out a low hiss as it armed. He didn't look up. He didn't need to. The trap was already done. The first soldier moved over a patch of flat rock where Dorian had dug out a false plate using a carbon-edged spoon and repacked it with dust. The alien's weight collapsed the cover instantly, snapping the soldier down into a jagged crevice lined with scavenged shrapnel. There wasn't a scream, just a short mechanical screech as the Zyvon's chest plate burst under the pressure of his fall. The others turned too slowly. The second trooper stepped into a magnetic snare disguised as a shard of Earth drone hull. The moment his boot hit it, the metal surface exploded upward in a brief EMP burst, frying his visor and blinding him long enough for Dorian to fire. The round struck the side of his neck, bypassing the armor entirely. He fell forward without even lifting his weapon. The remaining 4 scattered, calling for air support, not realizing Dorian had already jammed short-range signals using a power cell taken from an old Martian crawler. He didn't have much left, only a few more traps, 2 confirmed rounds, and a shoulder that throbbed with every move. But that was enough. One of the troopers tried to take cover behind a boulder that had a small reflective mirror placed on its edge. The alien didn't notice the reflection until he caught the gleam of his own visor, right before a shot tore through his side. Dorian's laugh was dry and barely audible through his mask. They were learning, but not fast enough. The Zyvon fleet above was not quiet anymore. Alarms were chiming. Admiral Jask slammed a clawed hand onto the comms panel, trying to get a full sit-rep. Rex paced in frustration, demanding orbital precision strikes. Talron said nothing. He was still staring at the kill counter. It now read 10. Whisper hadn't just survived. He was executing their best operatives. Silently, methodically, the fleet's internal systems began to glitch with each update from the battlefield. Somehow, the human was linking his kill count into their HUDs. It wasn't just war, it was theater. Every Zyvon soldier now knew exactly how many had died, and who killed them. On the surface, Dorian wheeled himself back from his scope. Sweat ran down his neck despite the cold suit. He was low on water. His lips were cracked. His joints were locking. But he was alive. And he wasn't done. He reached into a compartment below the floor grate and pulled out an old Earth drone processor unit, barely functional. He'd spent months modifying it. If he could get it airborne for even 5 minutes, he could simulate movement elsewhere and draw them away from his actual position. It was a gamble. He had to expose himself to get it clear of the wreckage. He waited until the last Zyvon trooper started scanning a fake heat signature near the northern ridge. Then Dorian moved. It wasn't fast. It wasn't smooth. But it was enough. He rolled his chair into an old cargo lift platform, braced himself with his good arm, and activated the drone manually. It buzzed weakly, hovering just above head height. It took off north like a dying insect. Immediately, the Zyvon tracked it and gave chase. Dorian's hand was already on the release trigger. When the drone passed the ridge line, it crossed a buried signal loop that he had rigged with Earth-standard explosives and some highly unstable Zyvon power cores. The explosion lit up the ridge like a second sun. The blast registered as a seismic spike from orbit. One of the admirals swore. The kill count rose to 12. Dorian slumped back, shoulder trembling. He could hear the structure above him groan with stress. The blast had drawn attention. He knew they'd send more. Not patrols. Not scouts. But elite. They were done playing. They wanted closure. But they didn't understand that to Dorian, closure was the war never ending. He'd buried friends on this rock. Watched Earth's flag be dragged through the dust. He didn't care about surviving. He only cared about the next number. The Zyvon fleet's war room descended into panic. Fleet AI calculated that, based on the current casualty ratio and Whisper's tactics, he could neutralize at least another 30 operatives before detection. Admiral Jask refused to believe it. He still thought the sniper was lucky. But Rex was now silent. Talron issued a quiet command to begin orbital mapping scans using heat residual trails. It wouldn't find Whisper. But it might find something he touched. Talron respected his enemy now. Whisper wasn't a crippled survivor. He was a fixed turret in a dying world, hidden, patient, and impossible to uproot. Back below the red sand, Dorian sat quietly, bandaging a wound on his thigh. Shrapnel. Nothing vital. He pulled out an old photograph from a helmet compartment. It showed his unit. All gone now. All except him. He stared at it, the image warped by years of radiation and time. Then he whispered to the dust, to no one, to everyone. You didn't bury me. You left me planted. Outside, another Zyvon dropship landed. Dorian heard the rumble, the shift of air, the change in the ground's tension. He rolled back toward the scope, loaded another round, and adjusted his angle. There was no panic in his motion. Just a tired rhythm. Just another breath. Just another number waiting to be added to the count. The sandstorm came in early. It wasn't natural, and Dorian knew that the moment his suit's filtration unit began whining under strain. Martian weather didn't shift like this on its own. The Zyvon had triggered atmospheric agitation to bury the outpost in noise and confusion, covering their next move under clouds of red ash and static-charged wind. It was a clever tactic. But cleverness was not the same as intelligence. Dorian sat still inside the collapsed structure, listening to the storm whip around the battered dome. Every loose panel, every crack in the hull, every cable above his head hummed with tension. His rifle was out of primary rounds, So he reached beneath the false panel and retrieved one of his last backups, a manually loaded cartridge built from repurposed drone rail casings. It didn't look like much, but in his hands it was poetry. The Zyvon elite unit had arrived. These weren't the hunters from before. These were the black-armored, low-profile, soundless killers who never missed. Dorian knew the signs. They moved with perfect silence, and even the sound of their boots was absorbed by the reactive terrain plates they deployed beneath each step. Standard motion sensors wouldn't catch them. Heat trackers would show ghost trails. But Dorian had grown up reading shadows and wind lines before Earth even had colonies. He didn't need clear visuals. He needed patience. He shut his eyes and waited. One of the elite stepped into the trap field without triggering anything. They were smarter, learning from their dead. They used a skin disruptor to sweep the terrain for non-native magnetic signatures. But Dorian had already removed all the tags. His traps were analog now. Simple mechanics. Rope, tension wire, counterweight pulleys. The kind of thing that existed before electricity. That's why they worked. One of them stepped across a stretch of rock with a small crack filled with fine powder. The dust shifted only slightly under the boot. That was enough. The wire loop hidden beneath it snapped upward, catching the alien by the foot and launching him backward into a jagged spike of scrap metal Dorian had embedded vertically. The impalement was fast. Silent. One down. The others didn't panic. They split off in different directions and activated their cloaking fields. But Dorian had a contingency for that too. He reached for a small device rigged from a broken Zyvon visor, its power cell just strong enough to emit a flash burst of low-spectrum light that triggered a chromatic distortion in active camo. He closed his eyes and hit the switch. The world outside flared for less than half a second. A shimmer appeared across the open field, like sunlight passing through a sheet of glass, and revealed 3 figures. Only for a moment. But a moment was all he needed. His shoulder screamed as he raised the rifle. He leaned the barrel against the side rail to stabilize it, angled low, and fired. The round caught one of the cloaked soldiers mid-chest. The armor held for a second before buckling inward. The figure collapsed, cloak glitching and sparking as the body convulsed against the sand. 2 more to go. Inside the orbital warship, Talron watched the live feed with a clenched jaw. The kill count had updated before they even received casualty confirmation. Whisper was wired into their system somehow, and every confirmed kill broadcast itself to the fleet's data feed before the field units could respond. This wasn't coincidence. This was infiltration. The human had hacked their war grid. And every time he fired, every time he killed, the entire Zyvon fleet saw it. They weren't just losing soldiers. They were bleeding morale. Admiral Vrex wanted a full kinetic strike. But Talron denied the request. He needed to understand Whisper. Because if they didn't, there would be more like him. More broken soldiers willing to die as long as they could take a dozen with them. Back on the ground, Dorian crawled forward now. His wheelchair had been overturned during the storm and buried under the collapsed ceiling panel. His spine brace ached as he dragged himself through the rubble, gun slung over his shoulder with a repurposed tent strap. The sand inside his suit itched and burned against his skin. Every movement pulled something tight. His good arm was losing strength, shaking under his own weight. But the enemy hadn't found him yet. Which meant he had another chance. He dragged himself under a broken arch and pressed into the corner of the room where the shadows were thickest. His breathing slowed. The second cloaked figure moved in, cautious, scanning for biosigns. Dorian held his breath. Waited. The alien passed within 3 meters of him, unaware that Dorian had already pulled the pin on a silent chemical charge left under a false rock beside the door. The trap didn't explode. It hissed, releasing a mist of oxidized Martian dust laced with antipolymer corrosion. The alien's visor clouded, then melted. He screamed, just once, before collapsing backward and seizing in the dirt. Dorian didn't watch him die. He was already focusing on the last one. The final Zyvon moved smarter. No sound. No scan. He stayed completely still for 5 minutes. Then moved again. Then stopped. He was baiting Dorian into revealing his location. And Dorian didn't bite. Instead, he triggered a noise loop in a separate tunnel using an old helmet speaker. The audio echoed, distorted and deep, making it sound like breathing. The alien turned sharply and aimed toward the tunnel. That was all Dorian needed. He fired the last round. The kill count on the fleet's interface blinked to 16. Talron stood silently. The crew around him stared, unable to comprehend what they were witnessing. Earth was supposed to be a memory. Its warriors extinct. But here, on this forgotten rock, one broken man in a chair was making their elite look like children. Talron turned to his staff and gave a single order. He's not a target anymore. He's a variable. And I want to know what made him. On the surface, Dorian slumped against the wall, coughing hard. Blood mixed with dust on his lips. He had nothing left but shrapnel, memories, and the faint buzz of power coming from the hacked alien radio he turned into a portable beacon. He tapped in a signal, not to Earth, but to anyone still listening. A single phrase encoded in Earth military shortband. Still here. He stared up at the cracked ceiling, stars barely visible through the ash storm. He wasn't waiting for rescue. He wasn't hoping for forgiveness. He just wanted the Zyvon to know one thing before he bled out under the Martian sky. You don't bury Whisper. You just give him better cover. The Zyvon command ship loomed in silence over Mars, its hull casting a black shadow across orbit. Inside, the admirals were no longer speaking in mockery or jest. The room that once echoed with laughter now felt like a sealed tomb. Vrex stood rigid, staring at the kill count display as it ticked again, this time with a slow, deliberate blink. 17 confirmed dead. All of them elite. No sign of the sniper. No body. No heat trail. Just that cursed Earth name pulsing through their data grid like a scar that wouldn't heal. Whisper. A myth. A mistake. A man who should have bled out on a cold rock years ago. Talron stood across from him, still quiet, unreadable as ever, but watching with sharp, predator's eyes. Jask finally broke the tension with a low growl. The admirals had tried hunters, traps, drones, scanners, and elite squads. All had failed. Vrex decided it was time to end it himself. The drop was fast and unannounced. Vrex didn't want witnesses to what came next. He brought no advisors, no aides, no swarm of soldiers. Just his personal armor rig, reinforced with command-grade shielding and laced with reactive plating. He brought down a stealth skiff that landed outside the outpost without so much as a shimmer in the air. He stepped off into the dust alone, confident that no Earth relic could match his speed, his reflexes, or his wrath. He had fought and won wars on 9 systems. Whisper was just a man. A dying man. A cripple. And Vrex wanted to see his eyes before the end. Dorian heard the descent. Not the sound of the ship, but the shift in pressure, the way the sand settled and the air became still. This wasn't like before. It wasn't a squad. It wasn't a sweep. It was a presence. Heavy. Intentional. Dorian lay curled against the wall of his makeshift sniper nest, body failing him in pieces. His thigh was bleeding again. His shoulder felt dislocated. The brace on his spine had cracked in 2 places, and he could barely move his fingers. But his eyes were clear. Focused. And his mind had already started working through the probabilities. The Admiral himself was coming. He wasn't just a commander. He was a statement. They wanted this to end publicly. With closure. With one final act of power. So Dorian gave them one. He didn't run. He couldn't. He didn't even crawl. Instead, he pulled himself upright using a loop of cable fixed into the wall, dragged his body onto the ledge overlooking the central clearing, and waited. Below him, Vrex moved with slow precision. His armor shimmered with refractive plating, bending the light around him, almost cloaking his outline. Almost. But Dorian had trained in zero visibility. He'd hunted in dust storms on Titan and smoke-choked ruins on Earth. He didn't need to see. He listened. One step. Another. The faint metallic ping of armored toes on gravel. Rex was circling the perimeter like a predator trying to flush prey from a burrow. But Dorian wasn't prey. He was bait. He triggered the decoy signal. An old comm array buried in the rubble across the courtyard lit up with a pulse of static and one recorded breath. It was his voice, distorted and broken. The Admiral turned. Dorian watched him move. Fast. Efficient. The suit reacted before the man did. But Dorian wasn't aiming yet. He was waiting for the moment. The suit needed to adjust after every high-speed burst. The servos had a thermal delay. Less than a second. But that was enough. Rex reached the source of the signal and found nothing but a broken helmet rigged with a mirror and a piece of rebar. Then a sound. A clink. Something metallic shifting above him. He looked up. Saw a flash of movement. Not a gun barrel. A lens. Just a lens. But it was locked on. He raised his weapon just as the sky exploded. Dorian had no rounds left. He had no functioning traps. But he still had the Admiral's pride. He used it to lure him to the courtyard, an exact radius he had calibrated days ago. In the center, buried under the rubble, was the last functioning kinetic drive core from the old Mars survey tower. He'd spent weeks rerouting its failsafe into a single-point detonation, triggered by weight displacement and proximity pressure. Rex triggered both. The blast wasn't nuclear. It was directional. It funneled upward, throwing the Admiral skyward like a ragdoll wrapped in fire. The armor held, mostly, but the force of the blast cracked the visor and slammed him down so hard the ground cratered beneath his frame. For a moment, the outpost fell silent again. The dust settled. The storm paused. And Dorian saw him lying there, half-conscious, helmet fractured, one leg bent wrong. Not dead. But not whole. Dorian pushed himself forward. Every nerve in his body screamed. He dropped from the ledge, landing with a crunch that nearly made him black out. He dragged himself across the rock toward the Admiral, inch by inch, until he was close enough to speak. Rex was breathing raggedly. One eye open. Glowing. Tracking. Furious. Dorian looked down at him, face barely visible behind cracked glass, voice a whisper through broken teeth. Still think I'm disabled? Rex tried to lift his weapon, but Dorian reached first. Not for a gun. For the comm unit still attached to the Admiral's wrist. He activated it and broadcast to the fleet above. Command Admiral down. Kill count 18. Then he dropped it, rolled away, and let the echo of that transmission climb into orbit. On board the command ship, Talron stood when the signal came through. The room froze. There were no more doubts. No more jokes. No more debates about whether this was real. It was. Whisper wasn't a sniper. He was a reckoning. He had buried 2 squads, hacked their systems, and taken down an admiral with a broken body and scraps of Earth's past. And now, with the fleet listening, he had humiliated them. But Talron didn't move to retaliate. He simply whispered to himself, a sentence meant for no one else. The last ghost of Earth is still hunting. Back on the ground, Dorian passed out in the dirt, barely breathing. His last thought wasn't about victory or vengeance. It was the stars overhead, blurry and red through the smoke, and a memory of his unit's final stand. He had lived long enough to outlast them. Long enough to make the Zyvon remember. Long enough for one more update. The wind howled across the ruined outpost, scattering ash and fractured metal across the Martian surface as the sun began its slow rise over the blood-colored horizon. Dorian Vale lay motionless in the dust, eyes barely open, lips cracked, fingers twitching against the broken handle of a field knife he hadn't had the strength to lift. His body was failing in pieces now. Every system overloaded. Every muscle screaming. His shoulder was dislocated, ribs likely broken, legs unresponsive, blood caked across half his face from the shrapnel that had cut through his cheek when the Admiral's shockwave threw him against the wall. But he was still alive. And so was the signal. The Zyvon fleet above Mars was no longer in silence. The kill count display continued its methodical, dreadful update. 19 confirmed. 1 admiral fallen. 2 elite squads erased. Every report coming from the surface carried a timestamp that synced perfectly with the fleet's internal data systems. Somehow, Dorian's beacon had not just sent kill counts, but embedded them directly into their HUD overlays. It wasn't just numbers. It was personal. Every Zyvan soldier who accessed their comms had to watch those updates blink into existence. Whisper was inside their minds now, a parasite wearing the face of a crippled human with 1 working arm and too much time. Talron was the only one not barking orders. He stood alone in the observation dome, staring down at the red world as if reading something invisible on the planet's surface. Vrex was still alive, technically, though half his command armor had melted inward, and he'd been dragged back to the medbay in silence. His pride had bled out long before his plasma-cauterized wounds had. The entire Admiralty now knew what they were facing. Not a survivor. Not a ghost. But an idea that refused to die. On the planet, the silence was broken by the faint beep of Dorian's portable uplink, jury-rigged, dented, patched together with melted alien components and twisted copper wire. He blinked slowly, trying to bring the screen into focus. It was flashing. A sync signal. It had connected with a dormant Earth orbital satellite. That wasn't supposed to happen. The satellite had been dead for years. Or so they believed. But some engineer back on Earth, some forgotten programmer buried under the bureaucracy of a collapsing planet, had embedded a failsafe. A simple subroutine. In the event of battlefield activity matching specific parameters, Zyvan presence, hostile movements, Earth military beacon activation, it would awaken. And now it was awake. The uplink trembled. A message flickered across the screen. Command node identified. Target locked. Awaiting confirmation. Dorian stared at the confirmation code. His hand barely moved as he dragged his finger across the cracked surface. It took him 3 tries. The code was simple. 5 digits. The number of his fallen unit. Once pressed, the satellite would not drop a missile. It would drop something far worse. A kinetic rod. A spear of tungsten alloy the size of a shuttle, moving at orbital velocity. No explosion. Just impact. Pure, precise, irreversible impact. Enough to erase the Zyvan command bridge from existence without triggering any war protocols. It would look like an accident. A malfunction. A simple orbital collision. He pressed confirm. Above, inside the Zyvan fleet, the alarm came in the form of silence. Not a siren. Not a scream. Just the sudden loss of telemetry from their primary command vessel. The moment of impact was so fast it wasn't seen, only felt. A shockwave, then absence. The bridge was gone. A section of the central ring now floated in 2 disjointed halves, metal twisted and burning, bodies sucked into vacuum in a sudden, silent end. The control board dimmed. The kill count rose again. 20. Talron didn't speak. He watched the last frame of satellite footage as the kinetic rod struck the ship. He watched the number blink. Then he finally gave a command. All Zyvan forces were to pull back from the Martian surface. No further engagements. Whisper was no longer a target. He was a variable. A myth. A caution burned into the memory of the fleet. Back on Mars, Dorian closed his eyes again. The sand beneath him was still warm from the residual energy of the explosion that had flared through the atmosphere like a ghostly sun. He couldn't feel his legs. Could barely feel his breath. His suit systems were in emergency shutdown. But his beacon still pulsed. He tapped it once more. Just enough to send out a final ping. No name. No rank. Just a number. 21. One of the dropships left behind on Mars received it. A pilotless transport rigged with Zyvan tech, scavenged by Dorian weeks earlier, now operated on a simple directive. Retrieve the beacon. No pilot needed. Just coordinates. It landed on the edge of the crater left by the final confrontation, automated arms digging through the rubble until they found him. He didn't wake as they loaded him in. He didn't move as the ship took off, climbing above the storm clouds, leaving the graveyard behind. Weeks later, in the far reaches of a forgotten Earth-friendly outpost station near Saturn's moons, a signal crackled through. A message. Broken, garbled. But the phrase was clear. Whisper lives. The officers at the station, young and unaware of what had happened on Mars, assumed it was some strange survivor's joke. But one of the older technicians, a retired scout who had fought in the early Zyvon skirmishes, sat quietly staring at the monitor. He knew the name. Everyone who ever served in black zones did. He reached forward, recorded the message, and filed it under a single label. Earth's last sniper. The legend would spread. Not just through Earth, but through Zyvon space. A sniper who couldn't walk, couldn't run, couldn't even hold his rifle without pain, had broken their elite, toppled their fleet, and carved his kill count into their pride. Dorian Vale had not fought to win. He fought to make sure no one ever underestimated what was left of Earth. And in doing so, he became more than a soldier. He became the story they told to scare each other. The one name they didn't mock. The number that kept rising even when no one pulled the trigger. The whisper that never faded. And far away, in a med bay surrounded by silence, Dorian breathed slowly beneath layers of gauze and steel. His body was wrecked. But his eyes were open. Watching. Calculating. And waiting for the next update.